Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final professional learning session on action research. During this session, we're going to explore step 4, which is evaluation. Before we start our exploration, let's quickly review the steps of our action research process or cycle. Step 1 is action identification. Here, we identify an unmet need or a goal in our daily practice. Then we consider an action that could be implemented to address that unmet need or goal we identified. Step 2 is determine your data indicators. This is where we identify data indicators that can be used to evaluate if an action implemented successfully addresses the unmet need or goal that we identified. Step 3 is action. During this part of the cycle, we develop an action plan to bring our conceptualized action to reality. And then we have step 4, which is evaluation. Let's now explore this step together. During the evaluation process, we collect or compile our data based on the data indicators we selected in step 2. We then evaluate the effectiveness of our implemented action.
As you've learned, in the evaluation step, we evaluate data to determine the effectiveness of an implemented action. But before we can evaluate data, we must first collect our data. So let's break step 4 into two subparts: collect and evaluate. Now let's take a moment to return to my question of the week action research journal to remember what data indicators I identified in step 2. I identified 3 data indicators that I could use to determine if my action implemented was successful. Those indicators were my work logs, AP exam scores, and survey questions from an end-of-year assessment. Questions like, what advice would you give new AP Computer Science A students, and rate your perceived level of support. As you've learned through this professional learning series, I'm not one to jump into something without having a plan in place. So it shouldn't be surprising that as I began collecting my data for my question of the week activity, I developed a data collection plan. It's not so much a plan as it is a series of questions to consider as you begin to collect your data. So let's take a moment to walk through these questions while considering my question of the week. Is my data available? Some of it is. I have access to my weekly logs. I have access to last year's AP scores, but I don't have access to this year's scores. And similarly, I have access to last year's student survey responses, but I don't have full access to this year's student survey responses, as students are still actively completing the survey. When will my data be available? My scores for this year's AP exam will be available in early July, and then this year's student survey responses will be available by the end of the school year. Where will my data be stored? My work log data is stored in my work logs from last year and this year, and these are housed in Teams. My AP scores from last year have been downloaded and are stored on my OneDrive. This year's AP scores will be stored temporarily on the College Board website. Once it's available, I'll just download it. My student survey response data is stored in Schoology. How will I access my data? I have links to my work logs from this year and last year. I'll access last year's AP scores from my OneDrive and this year's scores from the College Board website. I'll access my student survey responses from my current AP CSA course and last year's archived AP Computer Science A course. Now I'm going to address the two questions at the end together. So what elements of my raw data will be useful for the data evaluation process, and how can I represent my data to aid in the evaluation? So since I have access to last year's work logs and this year's work log data, I'm going to use that data to answer these questions. I will return to these questions once I collect my data for the other two indicators. I will say I worked with Dr. Myers to determine what data I should collect from my work logs, and he also helped me to develop a visual representation of my data. So if you get to these two questions while, creating a data collection plan and you're like, I don't know quite what data I need to grab, definitely reach out to Dr. Myers. He's a super helpful resource in this regard. So based on our discussion, I collected data from the same week in quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, and quarter four of both school year 23-24 and school year 24-25. And from that data, I noted the number of communications per student for the given week. So, and I tallied that data based on the number of communications. So if there were 0 communications per student, 1 communication per student, or 2 communications or more per student in the given week. Once I tallied all that data, I stored it in a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet data was used to develop the visual representation of the data. So we're going to take a look at the collected data right now, but we'll look at the visual representation of the data in the next step. I'm not going to take a long time here. I really just wanted to let you see what my work log collected data looked like. And in the case that maybe my explanation of how I was collecting the data wasn't clear, I'm thinking that maybe the actual collected and compiled data might be clearer. So now we're going to take a pause and we're going to take some time to either collect data or to develop a data collection plan. Welcome back. So once we've collected our data, it's time to evaluate the data. And as I mentioned, Dr. Myers helped create a visual representation of my data. So let's look at that now. So here's the visual representation of the data that was developed by Dr. Myers. As you can see, our quarter data is listed side by side. The light blue values represent the percent of 0 communications by students. The middle blue is 1 communication by students, and the darker blue up at the top is 2 or more communications by students. So in addition to developing this chart for a quick visual representation of the data, Dr. Myers also ran it through analysis software, and he said this, that both categories 0 and 1 were statistically significant, and not just any direction but in the right direction, with a decrease in zeros and an increase in ones. Okay, so from that, now, of course, there can be a lot of indicators what might have changed that, decrease in zeros and increase in ones from one year to another. I'm going to use this data along with the other data that I evaluate to kind of consider that maybe the action implemented was moving us in the right direction. But let's be real, the collection and evaluation of data is a really time-intensive task. And as such, we're just going to look at what that looked like from my question of the week activity, and instead we're going to let you do the collection and the evaluation on your own, and maybe with the help of Dr. Myers. Definitely a very useful resource there. And so instead what we're going to do is we're going to take some time to focus our attention on a prompt that is in the Action Research Journal, which is to develop an executive summary. So essentially, once we collect and evaluate our data, we have moved all the way through one full iteration of the action research cycle. And as such, it's a good idea to look back at that whole iteration and sum it up using an executive summary. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just kind of dissect an executive summary. So an executive summary is going to have these three parts, a problem statement. And if we think in terms of action research, we can think of the problem statement as our identified need or goal to be met. Okay, so then the second part is the solution statement. And in action research terms, that means the action implemented to address the identified need or goal to be met. And then finally, the conclusion statement. And in action research terms, that means the evaluation of our data and analysis of the effectiveness of that implemented action. So I have begun to develop my executive summary for my question of the week activity, but since I'm still waiting on additional data to ensure a well-informed evaluation and conclusion statement, I've only developed the problem and solution statement. So let's look at that now. Okay, from my action research journal, this is, as I said, my problem statement and my solution statement. I'm just going to read it. You guys can read along. So based on student responses to the end of year course survey question, what advice would you offer to another student taking AP Computer Science A virtually? From those responses, it was apparent that students felt frequent communication with their teacher beginning early in the school year was a key to course success. To address this student identified area of need, I introduced the question of the week activity wherein students were provided with a point earning content-based question weekly that must be responded to via chat. The activity is point earning to promote completion. It's content-based to improve comprehension of the subject matter, and it's weekly to foster student-teacher relationships. And so, like I said, once I've worked more through the evaluation process with my other two data indicators, I'll come back and I will write my conclusion statement.
Now let's pause again to develop a problem statement and a solution statement of an executive summary. And with that, everyone, we wrap up our guided exploration of the action research process. Thank you for allowing Rachel to share her question of the week with you. We're now going to take a moment and allow you to share your experiences, your takeaways, and more regarding the action research process.
Hi everyone. Now we'll explore how to connect your action research journal to our continuous school improvement evidence collection. Your action research journal, while primarily for your professional growth, also meets Cognia standards. You can include your journal in your CSI evidence package, which is due in June. Let's go through the process. To access the CSI page, open our virtual school website. Go to Continuous School Improvement, select the DVHS CSI evidence file. As you go through this process, have your action research journal readily available. Use this document to help you identify the type of evidence you are submitting. We have teaching strategies and pedagogical approaches, technology tools and platforms, program initiatives and school-wide projects, and resources and instructional materials. Once you choose the category that best fits with your action research, select and download the corresponding evidence document. For type of evidence and description, write that your evidence is your action research journal and include a brief description of your research. You will notice the questions on this form are quite similar to the questions and prompts in your action research journal. For example, This first question asks what factors informed the decision to implement this strategy or method. If you refer to your Action Research Journal, you'll see that step 2 is determine indicators and data points. You can copy and paste your notes from step 2 in your journal or simply write the statement, see step 2 of my Action Research Journal at the end of this document. This next question requires you to identify the DoDEA curriculum standards and/or Cognia standards or DVHS mission. If you have not included any DoDEA curriculum standards in your action research, you can identify them here along with Cognia standards. For non-academic research, apply Cognia standards 2 and 4, which address the culture of learning and the fostering of positive relationships. To address this question about the expected impact on student learning, look to step 1 of your Action Research Journal where you identify the goal, or you may refer to step 1 of my journal at the end of this document. For these bulleted questions, copy and paste step 4 from your Action Research Journal, or simply write, see step 4, evaluate an executive summary in my Action Research Journal. It is possible that you don't have step 4 completed in your action research. You might have some data or will be collecting and compiling data in June. This is the case for me, and I made a note in this box about anticipated results and positive next steps. For this final piece, you will add your Action Research Journal to the end of this document as your artifact. As you can see, it's listed as an evidence category here. Now you will take a few minutes to view a few examples of CSI evidence packages that incorporate action research. Your facilitator will help you locate these examples in the CSI IA Team Teacher Practice folder, Action Research.
So here we are. We started this process that identified action areas based on observations, our needs, and our priorities. We determined data indicators to measure progress and impact. We implemented actions in our classrooms or even some of our programs. We collected relevant data through observation, through feedback, and performance metrics. Today, you evaluated your results to reflect on outcomes and effectiveness. We now want to hear from you. Please take a moment to provide feedback to a brief questionnaire. Your insights are essential and will directly inform how we as a school can share and improve our action research process next school year with more support and direction from administration. What's next? This will be an ongoing cyclical process into the next school year. We will have increased guidance and alignment with school-wide goals that will come from administration. Our collective focus will be on refining strategies and deepening impact. From IA Team number 1, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for collaborating and engaging with us throughout this entire professional learning series.